We're going to begin. So once again, on behalf of the entire Memory and Aging Project, I want to express to all of you how much we appreciate your support, not only in participating in all of the studies that we ask you to do, but for everything else you do, including coming here today. This is a great opportunity for us to give our appreciation to all of you for your contributions to the fight against Alzheimer's disease. So thank you very much. So this is the Memory and Aging Project participants meeting here I guess I better show you this slide quickly before I forget. So I'm going to take my phone and put it on silent mode. Some of you have come to these participant meetings for many years. The entire staff of the Memory and Aging Project really contributes and plans and works very hard to put on these meetings. I cannot identify all of the people who are here today, but I am going to ask everyone who is in the Memory and Aging Project to please stand up and wave your hand so we can give you a round of appreciation. Please stand up, Memory and Aging Project. In addition to the entire staff, we have a great audiovisual team led by Ron Hawley and Howard Palmer, and they are in the way back and they're waving their hands, so let's thank them. And as always, even though this is a team effort, there is a person in charge who really makes it all work, and I don't see her here, but if you can rustle up Jennifer Phillips, where is Jennifer? Oh, there's Jennifer. She did it all. Some of you may have seen the slideshow as you were having breakfast about risk factors for Alzheimer's and what we might do about them, and several of you have already commented about how positive those slides are. They are printed out in the back of your packet, so you have them to take home with you. And I will just say that it is something that we and others are always interested in, what factors in life may increase risk for Alzheimer's, or what can we do to decrease risk for Alzheimer's. And the slides, I think, do a tremendous job of going through that. They were put together by 3 of our Memory and Aging Project staff, Dottie McDowell, Nicole Elmore, and Marissa Strite. So they deserve applause as well. And it's complicated. It's complicated what might reduce risk, what might. How many of you heard doing Sudoku is helpful? Anybody hear that? You know that in midlife, being overweight is a risk factor for Alzheimer's. But surprisingly, in late life, being too thin is a risk for Alzheimer's. How many of you have heard that red wine protects against Alzheimer's? Now, red wine is a risk for Alzheimer's. So it's complicated. I know of only one activity that is guaranteed to reduce risk of developing Alzheimer's. You all know what that is, right? Attending this participants meeting. All right, so we should talk about what we are trying to do here today, and we talk about the Memory and Aging Project because that's the participant-facing part of our study, our staff, our clinicians, you, the team. But the Memory and Aging Project is supported by grants that come primarily from the National Institute on Aging. And we do have an Alzheimer's Disease Research Center grant. That's the name of the grant. We're one of 37 centers across the United States, but we have two other very important grants that support us as well. They're called Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia and the Adult Children Study. The Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia grant first started in 1984, so we have well over 40 years of continuous activity in that grant. Our grants are, as I said, come from the National Institute of Health, particularly the National Institute on Aging, and they give us funding to do research in 5-year periods. At the end of that period, we have to reapply and get approved for another 5 years of funding. Fortunately, for all of our grants, we have always had the grant renewal take place. We've been very, very pleased about that. The Knight ADRC renewal happened last year, and it was a total of $22 million. However, you may have heard that there is new foci of interest in the National Institutes of Health and the National Institute of Aging. They thought that there were too many staffers, so they let a lot of people go, and other people left because of the change in tone and mission. So the NIH no longer is very geared towards getting out grants appropriately. So even though our Knight ADRC grant was renewed last year, we're great. The previous budget period ended May 1, and we had a period of 2 or 3 months where we didn't have any funding until the funds finally came through in July. We talked a little bit about this last year, but the new administration has a different approach to science. And as I said, they emphasize reducing government spending, major staff reductions across the board, and as I just indicated, the functioning of the NIH is remarkably slow. And the decisions about which grants the NIH will fund has also changed, less emphasis on the quality of the proposed research, more about the topics that the research proposes to address. And research on social justice and diversity and equity and inclusion now deliberately are not being funded. And if there was a prior grant that was funded to look at the diversity, equity, inclusion, that grant was terminated. And this continues. One of our investigators had a grant approved, but the NIH administrator said, well, you have a word in your grant that we think is inappropriate, equitable. That's not a good word. So as you can see, the investigator had to delete that word in order to get the grant funded. Now, there are other forbidden words or topics that we cannot use in grant applications. For example, elderly, men, women, Gulf of Mexico? In some ways, this is humorous. In some ways, it is very serious. And it makes grant applications very delicate. We have to be clear about the science that we propose, but we have to frame it in terms that the NIH will accept. So our program, so I mentioned the ADRC grant was renewed a year ago. We submitted a year ago also a renewal application for that Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia Program project, and it would be for years 41 to 46 or 7, we'll figure it out, 43 to 47. And we incorporated into that grant application the other major grant we have, the Adult Children Study. And what we aim to do with these grants is study the development of Alzheimer's disease in the brain from middle age through old age. And we had these various projects that are listed here that are proposed to extend our research to the general population, to be able to look at biomarkers for Alzheimer's and to predict the onset of who might develop symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. Well, that grant application went in, got a review. We think that it may get, and it's a large grant, almost $38 million for 5 years. And the NIH is considering funding it, but they haven't yet come to a decision, so we don't know if that grant will be funded or when it will be funded. By the way, our grant funding for both of those grants ended in the end of April, so right now we don't have grant support for the research that we are proposing. We are continuing to keep things going with funds available to us that don't come from the NIH, but we're also very conscious of the costs, and we have to be careful we have to conserve the dollars we have available to us. So belt tightening, that's what we're doing now until we learn about the fate of that grant. We are fortunate, we do not have to reduce any staffing. We never have, ever. And as long as I'm the director, we won't. But should staff leave, we may not fill that position right away. For the time being, we have loyal Memory and Aging Project participants who live outside of the St. Louis area and come in for their assessments. Right now, we're suspending that so we don't incur the travel expenses. We are still getting blood and spinal fluid to look for biomarkers of Alzheimer's, but we are not running the actual assays because they're expensive until we learn about the fate of the grant. And right now, we're not accepting new participants. Now, what can participants do? Well, you already are giving the Memory and Aging Project the most valuable gift of all, your participation. That's tremendous. That is remarkable. If you really want to do something, why don't you pay us to have your PET scan and your spinal tap? Okay, as it says, I'm just kidding. But on a serious note, here is something to consider, and it's entirely voluntary. We are pleased to compensate you for the time you give us, including for the clinical visits that you have with the physician or the nurse practitioner. We pay you $50 for that, and your study partner $50 if they come with you. And when you get your cognitive testing, we pay you $50, and that's because we honor your commitment and want to compensate you for it. However, if you want, entirely up to you, you can waive that compensation. And if so, then we will be able to use the savings to support the research operation. Your decision about this is entirely confidential and, as I said, entirely voluntary, and there's no obligation to waive compensation. Hopefully all of this is going to be temporary. We'll get the grant and we can continue as before. All right, here's the leadership of the Memory and Aging Project. And I'm not going to go through all the names here, but these are all the different components: administration, clinical core, the biostatistics core, neuropathology core, genetics core, fluid biomarker core, imaging core, biomarker core, research education component, health disparities engagement core, outreach recruitment and engagement core, and cognitive assessment unit, and our clinical trials unit. And I'm pleased to say that the leadership includes men and women in equal amounts. Here is the Memory and Aging Project staff. And again, I won't name everyone, but I do want to note that I've been very fortunate that Justin Long, who is one of our presenters here today, has agreed to take on an increased administrative role, and when I retire will succeed me as the Memory and Aging Project Director. And all of us are very, very grateful to Nicole Elmore, nurse practitioner, who is the Associate Director. So please give Justin and Nicole a hand. Okay, so what is it that we're all about? Well, we think that dementia comes in people who have Alzheimer changes in their brain because those changes cause the brain cells called neurons to die. When the nerve cells die, they can't carry out their function. They can't, for example, the nerve cells involved in memory, when those nerve cells die, memory starts to fade. As more nerve cells die, memory loss gets worse and worse and worse. So we are always going to want to treat people with Alzheimer dementia, but it's going to be difficult to restore those brain cells. So our idea is to begin even earlier, before those brain cells are damaged and dying. Let's find out when the process in the brain starts, before there's serious brain damage, and try to treat people then to prevent dementia. Does that make sense? So that's our major theme. That's what we're all about. So we ask, will adults with this pre-symptomatic Alzheimer's disease, will they all go on, if there isn't any treatment, to develop Alzheimer dementia? And can we understand what causes people to change from being normal in terms of memory and thinking to developing dementia? And let's use prevention strategies to try to prevent dementia from occurring at all. This is a schematic of brain cell. All of this is microscopic. You cannot see these lesions unless you're looking at the microscope. But there is a round cell body that has extensions, and that's the nerve cell or neuron. And in the middle is a conglomeration of pinkish fibrils. That's the amyloid. And then all around the amyloid are processes that try to destroy the amyloid, because amyloid deposits in the brain is the hallmark of Alzheimer's. It does not occur normally. That's just an abnormal process. All of the brain defense mechanisms see that amyloid, there and they try to get rid of it. But these defense mechanisms are not very smart because they kill everything around the amyloid plaque, including the nerve cell. So that's how the process progresses, and nerve cells ultimately die. So the way we think about it is there's a long period of time when amyloid and the other major protein abnormality, tau, are building up in the brain, but there are no serious damage to nerve cells, to brain cells, so the people remain cognitively, memory and thinking-wise, they're normal, but eventually the brain cells die and then people progress to the dementia phase. You'll hear more about that process from some of our presenters. Okay, what about you? MAP participant characteristics. If we include everybody that we saw in the year 2025, it's over 1,000 individuals, ranging in age from 39 to 97. About 60% are women, about 18% are African American, and you are all remarkable people and have, on average, over 16 years of education. People come from 25 different states: California, Washington, New Hampshire, Florida, Texas, and South Dakota. And the longest period of continued participation is 39 years. Mr. Ted McClure, is he here with us? Thank you. Thank you, all of you participants, and thank you, Mr. McClure. We ask a lot of you, we know that. And no, you don't have to pay us for the spinal tap. But look at this. This is remarkable. Almost 86% of you have had at least one amyloid PET scan. 89% of you have had a brain MRI scan. And 75% of you have had a spinal tap. There are 200 participants have had 3 or more spinal taps, and 71 have had 5 or more spinal taps. And every one of those 71 individuals still is walking. So these are all the different studies that you can participate in, and there are a lot of them. I've gone over some of them already, but we've been looking also at aspects of sleep and its relation to Alzheimer's. The environment of the gut system may influence brain inflammation. Exercise, it may reduce risk for Alzheimer's. And then we have a whole group of other studies that look at different things, including driving ability, propensity to fall, pollutants in the air, and changes in the retina, part of the eye, maybe give a signal about Alzheimer's. You are a remarkable group, and other investigators recognize that, and they wish to have you in their studies, or at least to have access to the information or data that you provide us. So we had in 2025 many requests for, over 100 requests for access to data, and it's not just at Washington University, but across the country and really across the world. We have great support in the community here, first at Washington University, but also the Greater Missouri chapter of the Alzheimer Association, the African American Advisory Board, led by Pastor Douglas Petty and assisted by Reverend C. Jessel Strong. Are there African American Advisory Board members here? If you are, will you please stand up so we can acknowledge you? We have an ethics committee. The leadership of the Knight ADRC and the Memory and Aging Project evaluated my approach to science and immediately said, boy, we need an ethics committee. So to make sure that we're doing it appropriately. Links Incorporated, the Harvey A. Friedman Center for Aging, Hope Center for Neurologic Disorders, Barnes Jewish Hospital Foundation, and Washington University, as I mentioned, all the way from the chancellor to the dean to our department chair, Dr. Jinmu Lee. And we have great support from different aspects of Washington University, including advancement and media relations. And we have been blessed with really generous donors. I can't tell you how important this is, particularly in this funding climate. And I'm going to embarrass two of the great supporters of our work, Roger and Paula Riney, who are with us today. So we're in a new stage of Alzheimer's disease, not only research, but also clinical applications. We can now diagnose Alzheimer's disease with a simple blood test. The blood tests now are getting approval by our Food and Drug Administration, and this is going to keep going. And they'll help research, but they'll also help ensure that people in the clinic are appropriately diagnosed. And we now have treatments that we can offer people who do have Alzheimer's disease. There are two types of treatments. For many years, we've had drugs that try to help the symptoms of Alzheimer's, but don't do anything about the brain changes. Some of these drugs you've heard of, one of them is called Aricept, but there are others. But in the past 3 years, we have drugs that attack the actual disease process. Right now, the drugs that we have available attack the amyloid plaques in the brain. And we have 2 of those that have been approved by the Food and Drug Administration. All right, but we're entering unknown territory because all of the drugs that have been tested in people who are predominantly healthy, except for Alzheimer's, white, well-educated, and affluent. So do they apply to the general population? We don't know. What happens if people have other illnesses? Does that affect their response to these drugs or risk for side effects for these drugs? And so we have a number of questions that we need to ask. These drugs are very expensive and they require a great deal of careful monitoring to make sure that side effects don't occur. And frankly, our infrastructure to do this is quite limited. We don't have enough memory disorder specialists to make the proper diagnosis and monitor the therapies. We'll hear more about this from Dr. Hahn in a little bit. So these drugs are called disease-modifying therapies, DMT. Those are the drugs there. They do slow the rate of Alzheimer dementia progression, but I think these are just the tip of the iceberg. We'll get much better drugs, and we'll start combining drugs to get combination therapy. Why not have an anti-amyloid drug, but also an anti-inflammation drug or an anti-tau drug, akin to chemotherapy, attacking different targets. And as we've already discussed, these drugs may work best to prevent Alzheimer's dementia. Well, we need the biomarkers. We don't want to give these drugs that attack the amyloid pathology of Alzheimer's disease if the person doesn't have Alzheimer's disease. So we need biomarkers to make the accurate diagnosis. And as I've mentioned, now they're here in blood tests. We have a number of these already available, and I think that it will be a real game changer if we can get a blood test and everyone for their annual screening to find out if they might have a propensity to Alzheimer's. So I'm going to skip this slide and get right to the program today. So we're going to hear from 4 individuals who are all up here on the podium with me. Mrs. Stephanie Griffin is a Memory and Aging Project participant like you, and she's going to share her perspectives on the participant experience. Dr. Long, I mentioned, is going to succeed me as Memory and Aging Project Director when I retire, and he's going to talk about a mimic of Alzheimer's disease called LATE. Dr. Kellen Peterson is going to take all the biomarker results and say, if somebody has a positive biomarker result, but they're not yet experiencing memory loss, can the biomarker result suggest when those symptoms might occur? And then Dr. Ji-Young Han is going to talk about the disease-modifying therapy. So it's a great program. I think we should get right to it because many of you know that at the end of the presentations, we're going to entertain your questions and try to address them. So we want to leave appropriate time for that. So will you please join me in welcoming to the podium Mrs. Stephanie Griffin.
Behind every research study is a person. Behind every statistic is a family. And behind every breakthrough is someone who participated. For me, that person was Ronald Bolin, my daddy. His Alzheimer's diagnosis changed our family forever. But his decision to participate in research gave our family something else, gave us hope, gave us purpose and an understanding of the significance of research. When discussing Alzheimer's disease, a public health crisis, we often focus on statistics, studies, and outcomes. Those things matter, but behind every research is a participant. is a person, is a family, and a story. Good morning. My name is Stephanie Griffin, and I welcome the opportunity today to discuss Alzheimer's research through a participant's lens. A perspective shaped by my daddy's experience, my family's journey, and my commitment to helping other families navigate this disease. Some may not know that African Americans are disproportionately affected by Alzheimer's disease, making research critical to improving treatments. Today, I'll share my family's story while exploring why Alzheimer's research matters, the historical mistrust that exists within the African American community, how that journey led me to become involved, and why research participation is so important. Why this matters. Alzheimer's affects every race, every culture, every community. However, Alzheimer's does not affect all populations equally. African Americans are approximately twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's. In fact, 1 out of 5 African Americans, seniors, will develop Alzheimer's or another dementia. compared to approximately 1 out of 10 white seniors. Many people may ask, why African Americans? Why are you twice as likely to get Alzheimer's? I'm glad you asked. That answer is complex and involves both medical factors and social determinants of health. Medical risk factors such as hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, obesity increase the risk of dementia that occurs at higher rates within African Americans. Social determinants of health are conditions in which people grow, born, live, work day to day, which impact health outcomes. These include access to health care, financial challenges, transportation barriers, access to healthy food, and educational opportunities. In addition, fear and mistrust of the health care system plays a huge role in treatment and decisions. Mistrust in the health system. Well, how could that be? To understand the mistrust, we must first understand some of the historical experience that helped shape. We must acknowledge history and what happened. Many African Americans approach healthcare and research with doubt and a lot of caution. One reason is the Tuskegee syphilis study, which lasted from 1932 to 1972. I won't go into all of the details, but during this study, African American men were misled and denied treatment, while researchers knew and observed the progression of the disease. The impact of that study extends far beyond 40 years. It created decades of mistrust. That continues to influence decisions about healthcare and research participation today. Understanding this history is not about dwelling on the past. It is about recognizing why mistrust exists so that trust can be created. I intentionally chose the word created rather than earned because it's more inclusive, it's more collaborative. It acknowledges that building trust is a shared responsibility. When communities and researchers engage with one another openly, respectfully, transparently, trust can be created. Meaningful progress can follow. Alzheimer's became personal when my daddy was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2008. Like many families, we were faced with uncertainty, questions, and a journey we had never traveled before. My husband, now, but boyfriend at the time, he's in the medical field and immediately noticed cognitive issues with my father. He encouraged us to seek answers. He guided us through what would be our Alzheimer's journey. We started with my daddy's primary care physician and eventually met with the neurologist who gave us the diagnosis that would change our life. My mother contacted the Alzheimer's Association. She signed us up for everything that they had. We attended support groups, educational workshops, community programs. It was through those experiences that my father decided to participate in Alzheimer's research. I began to see the importance of research and how it plays in advancing the care and the treatment. My daddy passed in March of 2015, but because of his participation, our family's experience, it became the catalyst for my involvement in Alzheimer's advocacy, education, and research participation. My why is my daddy. While attending those support sessions, I noticed there were very few African Americans, people who looked like me, that participated. I wasn't sure why, but I wanted to make sure these researchers resources were available and accessible to all families. My mother and I often talked about how different our journey would have been had we not had somebody to help, not had my husband. For our family, he was awesome. He helped us through our struggle. But that question sparked my motivation. In 2013, I spearheaded the first St. Louis City Caregivers Workshop Series, a partnership between my church, Friendly Temple Missionary Baptist Church, led by Bishop Michael Jones, the Alzheimer's Association, Greater St. Louis Chapter, and my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, the Gamma Omega Chapter. We started as a small, free educational program serving about 80 people annually, and it's still going, and it's still free. Every third Saturday, reaching 5 to 6 participants each year through in-person and virtually sessions. The series were built on beliefs that Alzheimer's affects not only one person, but the entire family and their caregivers. Through workshops, we provide information on Alzheimer's, dementia, caregiving, healthy aging, mental wellness, financial planning, legal planning, Medicare, Medicaid, hospice, palliative, and all other topics that will challenge families as they navigate their caregiving journey. In 2016, I became a participant in the Adult Children's Study at Washington University. This year, I celebrated my 10th year, and Dr. Morris presented me with my pen. Thank you. My why is simple. I wanted families and caregivers to know that they are not alone. I want people to have access to education, resources, and support during this difficult time. By increasing awareness, education, and encouraging research, we can improve lives today while creating a better future for generations to come. Fortunately, research today is different than decades ago. Participants are protected by strict ethical guidelines. Researchers must explain the purpose of the studies and obtain written consent. Independent review boards oversee the studies to ensure safety and ethical conduct. Participation is optional. No one is forced. You can get out at any time. Researchers are increasingly partnering with community organizations, churches, and advocacy groups. Today's research is built on transparency, respect, participation. These safeguards are designed to protect participants and prevent history from repeating itself. As I close, I want to leave you with hope. While we do not have a cure yet for Alzheimer's disease, we have significant strides. Researchers have developed blood tests that can help detect Alzheimer's earlier, and new treatments are becoming available that may slow down the disease progression. Research continues to improve how we diagnose, how we treat, how we care for people living with Alzheimer's. Institutions such as Washington University are among the leaders in Alzheimer's research, right here in St. Louis. Progress happens because people choose to participate. Researchers remain committed, and communities stay engaged. Advances remind us that research works. If we are serious about finding a cure, researchers need communities. Communities need researchers. We must all work together to create trust, increase participation, and ensure that every community has a voice in the future of Alzheimer's research. Thank you for the opportunity this morning. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Before I introduce the next speaker, I was reminded that June 6th, participants meeting, but also the anniversary of D-Day. So if we have any service veterans here in the audience, would you please stand so we can acknowledge you? Okay, so you've heard about biomarkers and how they are game changers. We're very fortunate to have one of the leaders in the determination of how biomarkers can not only help diagnosis but help predicting when dementia may occur with us today. Dr. Kellen Peterson is here. He's a member of the Fluid Biomarker Core of our Knight Alzheimer Disease Research Center, and he's going to address the question, when do symptoms start? Kellen? Please welcome him.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Morris. So like Dr. Morris said, my name is Kellen Peterson. I'm in the Department of Neurology at Washington University, and I work in the Fluid Biomarker Core at the Knight ADRC. The main question I'd like to discuss today is whether or how we can use biomarker tests, or specifically blood tests, to predict the onset of Alzheimer's disease symptoms. This is something our group has been interested in for a long time. I'm looking forward to sharing some of our recent results. First, a little bit of background. Cognitive impairment just means a noticeable change in memory or thinking. And at first, these changes might be very, very mild. And then when those changes start to interfere with everyday life, that's what we call dementia. And there's many different conditions that could cause cognitive impairment or dementia. And Alzheimer's disease is simply the most common cause. And what makes Alzheimer's disease very specific is what's happening in the brain. Specifically, as we've previously discussed, there's two proteins that are changing, amyloid and tau. And as these proteins build up, they deposit plaques or tangles in the brain. And what we're able to do is detect these biomarkers, and we're able to look and identify whether it's Alzheimer's disease or something else that is the cause for these symptoms by looking at these markers in the brain. So the reason that we're able to study these things in the brain now is because we have new tools to look at these plaques and tangles in the brain in living people, which we didn't used to be able to do. And these tools are called biomarkers. And there's 3 different ways that we can measure these biomarkers. One is through an amyloid PET scan, which is where a person is injected with a radio tracer. It attaches to the amyloid, and during a PET scan, it lights up. And this is a very accurate way to measure this, but it's also very expensive and not very accessible. So the second way we can do this is through cerebral spinal fluid, which is obtained during a lumbar puncture. And then the fluid is tested for amyloid or Alzheimer's proteins. And we're looking for specific proteins. There's a few listed here. And those proteins in the fluid change as the plaques and tangles in the brain build up. And then the third one, the one that I'm mostly interested in, is blood tests. And this is the one that's the cheapest and it's the most accessible, which is one reason it's the most promising biomarker. So the analogy for what our method does is related to tree rings. So we know that tree rings get one tree ring every year at a very consistent rate. And what we've determined or found out is that amyloid in the brain accumulates at a very consistent rate as well. So for example, if we look at a tree ring and we count 82 rings, we can estimate that tree is about 82 years old. So in a similar way, we know as amyloid's accumulating at a consistent rate, we can look at the amount of amyloid in the brain and estimate when somebody started accumulating amyloid. And that's what we call an amyloid clock. So in this study, we wanted to know, we had previously done, our group created an amyloid clock from this amyloid PET data, and we wanted to know, can we do the same thing with blood data? And the answer is yes, and I'll show you a little bit how we did that. And then the next step was, once we create this clock, can we use information from the clock to predict when symptoms are likely to occur? So if you look at this, this is some work from several years ago, I think 4 or 5 years ago from our group, when we developed an amyloid clock. And what we see is here, the figure on the left, this plots amyloid levels that are called SUVRs, plotted against age on the bottom. And what we see is that it looks kind of messy. It's hard to make sense of what the data is telling us. And that's, the reason is that people start to accumulate amyloid at different ages. Some maybe younger, age 60, some older, age 80. And that makes the plot difficult to understand what's happening. But when we adjust the trajectories and not plot them against age, but instead plot them against once somebody starts accumulating amyloid, we actually see the trajectories line up very nicely. And that allows us to create this clock, which is represented in the middle figure, which is this table. It's just relating the amount of amyloid in the brain to how long it took to accumulate that amount of amyloid. So for example, we see in the yellow box, if someone has an amyloid level of 2.2, it took about 9 years to develop that amount or accumulate that amount of amyloid. And so with that information, we can estimate when they started accumulating amyloid. So for example, if somebody was 70 years old, they come in, they find out that they have an amyloid level of 2.2, they've been accumulating for 9 years. They started accumulating amyloid around the age of 61. And the reason this is important is because we also found that knowing when somebody started accumulating amyloid is very much related to when they develop symptoms. So when we looked at the relationship between the age of starting to accumulate amyloid on the bottom and when they developed symptoms, we saw that you were really able to predict this with this amyloid PET clock. Oops. Okay, so our question was, can we do the same thing with a blood test, which is, like I said, a lot more accessible and easier to get. So here we have data. This data might be from many of you in this room. And it's plotting, so for blood tests, we're using a specific marker called p-tau217, which is the leading blood signal for Alzheimer's disease. And when we plot the trajectories of this p-tau217 for individuals versus age, again, like the amyloid data, it's very much a mess. We don't know what to do with it. But if we line up these trajectories, not by age, but instead by when somebody started getting abnormal levels of amyloid, we actually see that these trajectories line up very nicely. And so this black curve represents our p-tau217 clock, which is the common pattern of growth that one might expect. Okay, so now to a few results. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So now just a few results. So once we have this p-tau217 clock, we're able to estimate when someone started getting abnormal levels of p-tau217. We wanted to, again, look at, can this, like the amyloid PET data, be used to predict when symptoms might occur? And what we found was that, again, when somebody gets abnormal levels of p-tau217, it's very much related to when somebody starts to develop symptoms and that allows us to make some type of prediction. Oops. Yeah. But a very important finding was that there's a large age effect, so that if somebody starts getting abnormal levels of p-tau217 in the brain when they're younger, it will take a lot longer to develop symptoms versus whether they get abnormal levels when they're older. So if someone starts having elevated p-tau217, say around the age of 60, it might take 20 years for them to develop symptoms, versus if they get high levels of p-tau217 when they're 80 or 90, it might only take 5 to 11 years. And we're thinking a major reason for this is that if you are older when you reach this elevated level of p-tau217, your brain is having to cope with other aging processes that accelerates this time to cognitive impairment. So what does this mean? So what this means is that we can use a simple blood test to estimate project when somebody started to accumulate or start getting elevated AD biomarkers. And why was this important is that if we can identify when someone started having elevated Alzheimer's disease biomarkers, we know that that age is associated with an increased risk of developing cognitive impairment. And we know that there's an age effect, and we can estimate approximately how long that might take. And then in those that actually do develop symptoms, knowing this age of when they start getting abnormal levels of either amyloid or p-tau217, we know that's associated with developing symptoms, and we can estimate that within 3 to 4 years. And it's important to note that currently this is only a research tool. This is not something that we'd haven't apply to an individual to make a personal forecast of when they might develop symptoms. But we're continually working on these models and trying to make them more accurate, maybe by combining p-tau217 with other data. And we expect that as these models become more and more accurate, they'll start to have effect on clinical trials by making them more efficient and faster. That's our hope, at least. And so I think this might be the most important slide of the presentation, but we all know that this works because of the many people and volunteers and participants who have given so much of their time, their blood samples, their years of return visits, including many of you in this room. And in my presentation, in the figures, every dot represents somebody that chose to participate in a study. And we know we can't do this. We can't predict, we can't study, we can't prevent Alzheimer's disease without any of you. Also, this was a huge effort. Many people were involved in this work. And I just like to thank my collaborators for making this possible. Thank you.
I want to let everyone know that Dr. Peterson and his collaborators published these results in a very prestigious scientific journal earlier this year, and it got a great deal of interest and publicity. But just to pick up on what Kellen said, this is not yet an individual tool. You can't find out from these studies, well, if I do have amyloid, then I will get Alzheimer's dementia in 5 years or 7 years. It's not there yet, but it's really exciting work, and maybe at some time it will be predictive. We're talking a lot about Alzheimer's disease here today. It is not the only cause of dementia. And in fact, many people who have Alzheimer's disease have other causes of dementia, mixed dementia. We're going to hear about a relatively new discovery of a dementing illness that mimics Alzheimer's disease, and we're very fortunate to have present Dr. Justin Long. Will you please welcome him to the podium?
All right, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to meet with all of you, and I just want to start off by offering my thanks to all of you for being participants in the Memory and Aging Project. Like everyone has already said, we can't do what we do without your involvement. So as Dr. Morris mentioned, I want to spend a little bit of time this morning discussing a relatively newly identified form of dementia called late, and it has a lot of features that overlap with Alzheimer's disease, which is one reason why we think it might be of interest to you. And so I want to compare it to Alzheimer's disease. All right, so just to level set, we've already discussed Alzheimer's disease in some detail, but I just want to make sure, since we're going to be making this comparison to Alzheimer's disease, we're clear on exactly what Alzheimer's disease is. So, as has already been said, Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia in individuals over age 65. The typical symptoms of Alzheimer's disease begin with the gradual onset and gradual progression of short-term memory loss. When those symptoms of memory loss progress to the point that it's impacting daily activities, we then say that individuals have Alzheimer's disease dementia. These symptoms do typically progress to affect other cognitive domains like orientation, language, problem solving, attention and concentration, visual spatial skills, and behavior. Now, those are the clinical symptoms that give us a clue that someone has Alzheimer's disease, but we define Alzheimer's disease by the presence of certain pathologic hallmark changes. And these include, as we've already discussed today, the amyloid plaques and tau tangles. And we now have reliable and accurate methods to be able to detect these changes in the brain before people pass away while they're living. And Dr. Peterson just spent a lot of time talking about some of those specific biomarkers. They include amyloid and tau PET scans, spinal fluid tests, and blood tests. But we've known for many years that there are other types of dementia that present in different ways than Alzheimer's disease. And over time, we found that there are different types of brain changes that cause those dementias. One of those dementias is a type of dementia called frontotemporal dementia. And in 2006, some scientists identified an abnormal protein called TDP43 that was accumulating in the brain cells of patients with this type of dementia, frontotemporal dementia, as well as a related syndrome called ALS, which is a degenerative disease of the brain and spinal cord that leads to progressive paralysis. And so they found that this TDP43 molecule, which is normally inside of the nucleus of the cell where the genetic code is stored, would move to what's called the cytoplasm of the cell outside of the nucleus and then aggregate and form compounds that were toxic to the cell and potentially lead to the death of the neurons that then leads to the dementia. But again, this was a syndrome that was very different from Alzheimer's disease, but this was identified as a likely cause of this type of dementia, at least some forms of it. And so this discovery began a broader recognition in the field that TDP43 could be important in brain degeneration. And so scientists began to look at individuals who passed away and had donated their brain to research who didn't have frontotemporal dementia to see if TDP43 might be present in the brains of those individuals. And so looking at cohorts of brain specimens from individuals who had Alzheimer's disease, they began to see that TDP43 was also present in the brains of these individuals. And they were present in areas that overlapped with where the tau pathology in Alzheimer's disease tends to accumulate. And so the thought was, well, maybe it might be contributing to some of the memory symptoms in these individuals who had Alzheimer's disease. Next step, scientists moved on to look at cohorts of brain specimens where there was no Alzheimer's pathology, or at least limited amounts. And these were individuals that had memory impairment that seemed similar to Alzheimer's disease, and again found that this TDP43 protein was present in these same memory centers. And so in 2019, a group of experts was convened, and they formally defined this new dementia as late, and I'll explain what late means here in just a minute, as a distinct age-related TDP43 disease that can mimic Alzheimer's disease. So what is late? So late is a acronym, it just rolls off the tongue. It's limbic predominant age-related TDP43 encephalopathy. So let's break that down a little bit. So limbic predominant just means that the pathology is occurring in what's called the limbic portion of the brain, which is involved in memory and emotional regulation. A stands for age-related. This is most commonly seen in older individuals above age 80. T stands for TDP43 because that's the pathology that's present. And E stands for encephalopathy, which just indicates that this is a disease of the brain. So late is an age-related brain disease in which abnormal TDP43 protein accumulates, especially in areas of the brain like the hippocampus that are important for forming and storing new memories. Late, as I said, is age-related, so it's most commonly seen in individuals over age 80. And it typically presents, at least the studies suggest that individuals who have late pathology present with gradually progressive short-term memory loss. That might sound very familiar to what I just described as the common initiating symptom in Alzheimer's disease. And so it is considered a mimic of Alzheimer's disease. So let's just compare late with Alzheimer's disease in a little bit more detail. So one of the differences is that Alzheimer's disease is also age-related, but it tends to initiate, the symptoms tend to initiate for Alzheimer's disease dementia at an earlier time point than it does in late. Again, late can be seen in individuals who are in their 70s, but more commonly in individuals who are in their 80s or 90s, whereas Alzheimer's disease is seen at a higher rate in individuals who are in their 60s and 70s. The clinical symptoms overlap, so both are characterized by the gradual onset of short-term memory loss early on, but with Alzheimer's disease, the symptoms tend to progress to involve more widespread cognitive impairment. With late, it may just remain affecting memory, and if it does progress to involve other cognitive domains, it typically is less significant or impactful than Alzheimer's disease. So it's really primarily the memory symptoms that are most prominent. As I've already discussed, they're defined by two different types of abnormal proteins that accumulate. In Alzheimer's disease, that's amyloid and tau. With late, it's TDP-43. The affected brain regions initially are very similar. So the tau pathology in Alzheimer's disease often begins to accumulate in areas important for memory near the hippocampus. And late also typically begins to accumulate in that same region. But Alzheimer's disease, the tau pathology often spreads beyond these memory areas to affect more widespread regions of the brain, whereas late mostly stays centered in these memory areas. So for Alzheimer's disease, we have very reliable biomarkers to be able to detect the pathology in individuals who are living. We have no biomarkers for late. So the only way we can definitively diagnose late or really identify who has it is by looking at the brains of individuals after they pass away. So for diagnosis, we can be fairly confident in our diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease when somebody has typical clinical symptoms and a positive biomarker test. We can have suspicion for late in individuals if they have symptoms of memory loss and have a negative Alzheimer's biomarker test, but we're not ever able to really be confident in that diagnosis without having an autopsy. And then the last difference I want to emphasize is the rate of decline. Both are slowly progressive diseases, but late tends to be much more slowly progressive than Alzheimer's disease. And so that's one distinguishing characteristic. So how common is late? There was a large autopsy study published in 2022 that looked at 6,100 individuals who had been followed for research and then passed away. The average age was 88, so this is the kind of population that seemed to be at risk for late. In this cohort, about 40% of the individuals had some degree of late pathology in their brain, and 25% had enough late pathology that it might be expected to cause cognitive impairment. When they looked just at those individuals in the cohort who had Alzheimer's disease, 50% of those individuals had late pathology. And when they looked at individuals who had limited or no Alzheimer's pathology in their brain, 25% of those individuals had late pathology. So late is not rare. It's actually very common in individuals in this age group. And it often co-occurs in individuals who have Alzheimer's pathology in their brain, but it can also occur on its own. So as Dr. Morris mentioned earlier, this just emphasizes that many older adults with memory loss may have more than one type of pathology that might be underlying their clinical symptoms. And so how does late affect cognitive change in people who have that pathology in their brain? So this is from a study in 2020 that looked at individuals who'd been followed over years and then passed away and donated their brains. And they found that those individuals that had late pathology, and this slide NC is just an acronym for the pathology, those who just had late pathology in their brain, they tended to progress at a very slow rate compared to those that had Alzheimer's disease or AD pathology. But those individuals who had both AD and late pathology progressed at the fastest rate. So when you have both Alzheimer's pathology and late pathology together, typically cognitive impairment is greater and the decline may be faster than with either alone. So just to summarize, why are we taking time to discuss this with you today? Why should you know about late? Presumably, all of you are motivated by understanding and learning more about Alzheimer's disease. So one thing is that late mimics Alzheimer's disease. It can cause very similar symptoms, but through a different biology. Two, it's difficult to diagnose. As someone who goes to the clinic with symptoms of memory loss, most clinicians probably aren't going to discuss this because we really have no biomarkers to diagnose it. Three is that it can add to the disease burden in individuals who have Alzheimer's disease. It can make their symptoms worse and they can progress more quickly. And Dr. Hahn's going to be talking about some of the new treatment options that we have for Alzheimer's disease that target amyloid. So these do not target TDP-43. So if someone has both Alzheimer's and late pathology in their brain, which as I just mentioned is pretty common, those treatments will not address the TDP-43 pathology in the brain, and so this could have impacts on how effective treatments may be. This is an area that we don't have answers to. It needs to be studied. And then I'll just conclude with the following point, that late is an example of why brain donation is so valuable in dementia research, as it can only be reliably diagnosed at time of autopsy. So individuals who participate in research and then for various reasons their brains aren't collected will never really know if they had this late pathology in their brain. So we're obviously grateful to all of the individuals, all the participants in our program, and those who donated their brain have really, that extra gift just provides a lot of extra data that's incredibly valuable. And then I just want to conclude by once again thanking all of you. We can't do what we do without your participation, as well as thanking all of the leaders and staff and faculty and clinicians of the Memory and Aging Project who allow the science to move forward. So thank you for your attention, and thanks to Dr. Morse for the invitation to speak.
Thanks so much, Justin. So now we're going to hear about update on the treatments, and we're very fortunate to have Dr. Ji-Young Han here, who has seen a number of patients in the clinic and has treated many and has great experience. We are one of the leading centers for treating people with these disease-modifying therapies. So please welcome Dr. Han.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, we can take a time for a little bit for stretch, so I know we've been kind of hearing a lot. But I'd like to thank everyone for having me this morning. I'm one of the clinicians at the MAP, but also I'm a doctor, a physician at our Memory Diagnostic Center, which is our dementia clinic. And I would like to share some of the things that we do and how these research that has been done so far has made the clinical practice different. Okay, so these are my disclosures. So I'm going to go back again to dementia. What is dementia? What is Alzheimer's disease? Because we know for sure repetition is the key to making that memory. So really, dementia is a symptom that we call when there is changes with cognitive functioning, including memory, thinking. It could also include language. It can also include visuospatial functioning, your attention, motor function. And the other key component is that we need the impairment that is significant enough to cause the changes in the activities of daily living. It actually impacts your daily life. So this is an umbrella term because many things cause Alzheimer's, dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, vascular disease, Parkinson's, Lewy body, frontotemporal, the late, and all of the above, honestly. And Alzheimer's disease is a very specific disease that we talk about, and it is defined by the amyloid plaque and the tau tangles. And this is the most common cause of dementia, taking up about 60 to 70% of all cause dementia. And we know these changes predate the symptom onset by decades, and we now have the tools to diagnose them decades earlier. So traditionally, what we used to do in the memory clinic is really more about knowing, what is not Alzheimer's disease, and we try to look for the things that are modifiable, where we can change to make things better. And that would include things like clinical diagnoses, the history and the cognitive testing. We will do things like focal neurological exam to look for Parkinson's or other signs of stroke and whatnot. And also the labs, including vitamins, to kind of look for the reversible causes. And we also have the MRI scans to see if, is there like a stroke? Is there anything else that could potentially explain the symptoms of these memory and thinking changes? And the treatment we used to have, like we said, we had the symptom medicines that really modestly improves the symptoms but not necessarily change the underlying cause, which we all know as like donepezil, rivastigmine, memantine, and galantamine. And what we do is also treating this other comorbidities of having people with anxiety, depression, and poor sleep, and these are the symptoms that we use to treat. And we still do all of this in the clinic. But what is different now? There are main two changes. One is that we have the Alzheimer's disease biomarkers that are readily available to use in the clinic, and we can diagnose people with Alzheimer's disease. And the other part is we have the therapies that we can use to make meaningful changes. And we have the access to amyloid PET, spinal fluid, the very highly accurate blood tests, but we do use them very sparingly. We will use them in cases when diagnosis unclear. There seems to be multiple things impacting here. We don't know what it is. Or if they seem to be a very good candidate for symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. So the caveat here is we don't usually recommend these tests to people who are cognitively normal yet in the clinical setting, because we do not have the medicines that will actually prevent yet. And then these disease-modifying treatments, which are the ones that is approved since July of 23, that would be lecanemab and donanemab, and they're game changers because they do slow down the disease progression by taking out the amyloid proteins from their brain. And these really changed our clinical practice. So this is just a summary of all the medicines that we've had so far since 1993, and there are only 10 that were approved. And 2 of them are actually out of market now. So it started with Tacrin in 1993, followed by the symptom medicines for donepezil, memantine, and galantamine, rivastigmine. And there's really not much from 2007 to 2021 until we got the aducanumab, which was another peeled-back medicine, but then lecanemab and donanemab. And now we also have some of the medicines that are approved for controlling the agitation symptoms of the Alzheimer's disease. But what we know for lecanemab and donanemab, in short, is that they are slowing down the cognitive decline rate in about, give or take, 27 to 35%. So we kind of give it a 30% in the middle. And they seem to stick. Their effects seem to be still accruing, even at the longer extension trials when we is still watching for 36 months. And the people who seem to start the medicines earlier on tend to have better benefits. And the main side effects, typically what we worried about were the ARIA, the amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, and they seem to be happening within the first 6 months, and they don't really impact a lot on the actual progression. So then it becomes, what does that mean? What does that 30% slowing look like? So one of our colleagues, Sarah Hartz and others, kind of looked at the model. So how does it translate? Say people have very mild dementia, like, very mild dementia, CDR Sum of Box 2, that's really mild. And if you're on these medicines for either lecanemab or donanemab for about 18 months, that extends the independence and instrumental activities of daily living in about 10 to 13 months. Okay, so what does that mean? It probably means, it's like extending your ability to independently manage your finances. It may be independently managing your medicines, your ability to drive independently without supervision, or it could be participating in your work or meaningful hobbies that you enjoy. And it's also all delaying the onset of, like the patient's caregivers being more hands-on supervision. And while, oh, it's only 10 to 13 months, depending on the families, it's a valuable close to a year. And what we've known is also, like, the earlier we start, these effects seem to be better. So what do we hear at WashU? We have our Memory Diagnostics Center. It's the dementia specialty clinic. We are 18 clinicians, including 13 physicians and 5 APPs. Over the past year, we saw close to 3,500 individual patients with memory complaints, and we have accrued extensive experiences on how to interpret the Alzheimer's disease biomarkers, as well as delivering the anti-amyloid therapies through our treatment clinic. And we still work very closely with our clinical trials unit where all these trials kind of started off. So what has changed? Over the past 3 years, our use of Alzheimer's disease biomarkers have increased to 7-fold. And you can kind of see from the graph where lecanemab was approved in July of 23, and since the mark, we've used a whole lot more. We're using all 3, amyloid PET, spinal fluid, and the blood biomarkers, but we are using a lot more amyloid PET right now, partly because that's the modality the CMS actually pays for consistently. So that's been kind of going on. What about the anti-amyloid therapies? So far, since the July of 23, we have been steadily increasing the use of anti-amyloid therapies. And up until May of this year, at least 623 patients have gotten at least 1 dose of either medicines. And this is probably by far the most in this country. So what do I see? So I'm probably the one who sees the most patients in our MDC. And from my own patients, it pretty still mimics and mirrors our clinical data. I have 111 patients in lecanemab, 42 patients in donanemab, total of 153 patients on either medicines. And what I see from my patients are these. My patients who are on the medicine are very mild. I only have dozens of patients who fall into category of CDR1 or mild dementia, but they're on the very milder side. And people who started very much earlier on and very mild symptoms, when I see them back in clinic, they actually are doing pretty well. So I get to see the patients in about year and a half, and the people who I started it earlier on, when they come back, they seem to be pretty much the same as the time that I saw them last. It could be both from the clinical function, but also the cognitive testing. And I do tell my patients, well, you're about the same from the last year in terms of both level of functioning, cognitive testing. This medicine is doing what it's supposed to do. It is not designed to improve the function, but it's supposed to slow things down. And I think that our experiences with ARIA has been pretty good too. I mean, honestly, it's been pretty manageable. Some people will eventually stop because of the symptomatic, this ARIA accumulating, but they usually don't have a lot of symptoms. And for those people who did, I do have at least a couple patients who needed inpatient treatment, but after they're out of hospital, they're probably about the same as before they went to the hospital. So what I've noticed and learned so far is really who we give and who we try to treat. The matter of selection of patients really matters, and it really seems to be the earlier that we can get these medicines to our patients, they have better outcomes. So the take-home message is this. Because of all these research and availability of Alzheimer's disease biomarkers and disease-modifying therapies, really are changing our clinical practice rapidly. And so far, this Alzheimer's disease can be diagnosed at the very earliest stages, and the early treatments really seems to be benefiting people, and they have better outcomes. And WashU, I'm proud to say that we are leading this change. And this is not the end. We are looking at newer biomarkers that will look into tau proteins and that could incorporate to the clinical practices. And we're looking at new medicines looking like different targets like tau, inflammation, and potentially using them as together. And all of this we were able to do, not without your support, and also our patients at Memory Dynas Center. And I also would like to acknowledge our staff at the Memory Dynas Center, because without their help, we cannot deliver this care to our patients. Thank you very much.
Well, those were 4 terrific presentations by Ms. Griffin, Dr. Peterson, Dr. Long, Dr. Hahn. Let's thank them once again. All right, so now it is time, if you have questions, to write them down on your index cards, and our Memory and Aging Project staff will come and you just hold it up, and they'll come pick it up and bring it up here. And we'll try to address as many questions as we can. We will not be able to get them all, but we will do our best. And I'm going to start with a question that was given to me at the beginning. Are women more at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease than men? So, boy, I don't even have to answer. People have said, yes, that's true. Now, for a long time, we thought that's because women are the stronger sex, meaning they live longer and age. Thanks. Thank you so much. And age is the greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, so we just thought more women living longer, they'd get more Alzheimer's disease. But if you adjust for that, still women are more at risk. More at risk. We don't understand all of the reasons why, but it's true. And not only are women more at risk for the disease, you probably are aware also that women represent about 75% of the caregivers for people with Alzheimer's disease. So they're doubly affected by this illness. All right, so we have a number of questions. The first one goes to Dr. Hahn. Dr. Hahn, you mentioned a side effect called ARIA. I don't know what ARIA is. Do you?
So ARIA is actually an imaging finding. It's called the amyloid-related imaging abnormalities. So directly related to images. But what we think is when these medicines try to remove these amyloid plaques from the brain, the proteins are pretty sticky, and when you're trying to take them out, it can cause inflammations that can cause things like focal swelling around because you're trying to take it out. Or it could be these proteins could be also in not only in the brain per se, but also in the blood vessels, which are supplying. And when you think of it, if you try to take those proteins out from the vessels, then you might see a leakage, like when you have like a pipe and underground and some sort of leak that comes in, and then the water leaks out, and we're seeing those changes. So those are called the ARIA. A lot of the times, most of them actually are not symptomatic, surprisingly. People don't feel anything, but it could look very scary on the scan, and that's why we try to monitor them when we are on those medicines, but they tend to happen within the first 6 months for the most part. And when they're becoming symptomatic, we see variety of symptoms, and it can mimic strokes, or scary literatures will say, and it can happen to anything. But most of the time, what we hear is maybe headaches, mild dizziness, but it can cause, it can mimic symptoms of stroke or cause seizures and whatnot. But I think those are very, from our experiences, we don't actually see them a lot becoming symptomatic.
Thank you. Here's a note. I was reluctant to attend the meeting this morning, but I am so glad I did. Thanks to all the map workers and all the presenters, very enlightening. And that Dr. Morris is such a wonderful... If a member of your study dies while out of the country, we'll make arrangements to recover the brain. Well, if you happen to be on the Riviera coast or in some southeast island, yes, we will. No, I'm afraid we won't be able to do it if you're out of the country. So, Dr. Long, you mentioned that there are no biomarkers for TDP-43. Is there work going on to develop that?
That's ultimately the goal. I mean, I think ideally we'd like to have biomarkers that would allow us to detect all of the different pathologies in the brain. Right now we only have biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease, but we'd like to have well-validated and accurate biomarkers for TDP-43, for other types of dementia that are associated with tau that we currently can't use our current biomarkers for. For Lewy body, we're developing some biomarker tests that can help with that, but they're not routinely used. So yes, that's the goal. We currently do not have biomarkers available currently. So in order to make a diagnosis of late, there has to be someone who has typical symptoms, meaning gradually progressive short-term memory loss, negative Alzheimer's disease biomarkers, and then we also look at imaging findings. We'd like to see that there's evidence of shrinkage in those memory areas, and based on that, we make a presumptive diagnosis of possible late, but that's the best we can do. So this is a point of emphasis of why we need biomarkers, and so that research is ongoing.
There are great questions here, and I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. Not surprisingly, a number of the questions do involve Dr. Hahn and the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. And I'm going to mention something that she has just accomplished very recently. She did a very thorough review for a medical journal called Missouri Medicine of supplements and whether they help the risk of Alzheimer's disease or not. So I'm not going to call on her to do this here because that will take up the rest of the time. But I'm sure that when the panel finishes, she will be very popular. You come up and you can talk to her for as long as she's willing to stay here. For Stephanie Griffin, what about information about starting a community Alzheimer's disease research effort?
Thank you. I would love that opportunity. I will jot that down, and I'm going to figure out how we make that work, but I think that would really be good so people will know what happens with research when you participate. So excellent idea. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give this to Dr. Long. Can a cognitive test be used before blood tests to determine if someone has Alzheimer's?
So when we make a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, we take all types of data into account. And so it's important that we collect a clinical history from someone who knows the individual well, so we take that into account. And yes, we also take into account cognitive testing. prior to the availability of treatments that targeted amyloid, that was the predominant way by which we made a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And in individuals who aren't receiving those tests, who don't qualify for those tests for various reasons, we often don't use biomarkers because it's not going to impact treatment decisions, and we base it primarily on the clinical symptoms. But we know that there's a proportion of individuals who ultimately, maybe 20 to 30%, who will not have a positive biomarker test based on clinical symptoms and cognitive testing alone. So to make a more definitive diagnosis, we do need those biomarker tests, but we don't always use them in clinical practice if it's not going to impact treatment decisions.
Thanks, Justin. Krista, is Dr. Hassenstam still here? Or? I'm sorry? He had to leave. Somebody asked about a study that Dr. Hassenstab is running, which is getting cognition measured by test on your smartphone. So you go about your daily life, you don't have to come into the Memory and Aging Project, you get a beep on your smartphone and it asks you some questions and you try to answer them. It takes about 2 or 3 minutes, but it would be repeated throughout a week, every 6 months or so, and that's a new way of trying to test memory and thinking and cognition that doesn't require you sitting down in front of a computer with somebody trying to give you answers. So it's everyday memory kind of thing. I just want to add on to what Dr. Long was saying about cognitive testing. The key thing with Alzheimer's disease is change over time, decline over time. I'm always impressed that early in my career in the Memory and Aging Project, I saw a man who had on his cognitive test performance a normal score. And then I saw a woman on her cognitive test performance, she was pretty far below that man, down on her cognitive testing. Over time, what happened is she stayed the same. She never changed. She didn't like to take tests. She wasn't very good. And when I look back about that man who scored normal, 5 years ago, he was twice normal. He had declined. And when I saw him normal, after that, he continued to decline. So the lady, poor testing, she stayed stable, but the man was declining. So it's not where you score on a test, it's how you change over time. Am I making any sense on that? Okay. Kellen, do you want to talk about artificial intelligence being used in Alzheimer research?
Is this, okay, yeah. So this is something I'm personally kind of interested in. My background is as a mathematician. And there is a huge effort in utilizing artificial intelligence in Alzheimer's disease research. I think the Alzheimer's Association just started a professional interest group that's focused on Alzheimer or artificial intelligence. That they have annual meetings, and they kind of put together white papers or ideas or how to use artificial intelligence in Alzheimer's research. So that's kind of one of the bigger efforts. You can just Google all the papers, and there are lots of papers on people using artificial intelligence. People use it for one of the new modalities or people are looking at is speech data, and see if they can use artificial intelligence to identify differences in patterns of speech or words. People are using artificial intelligence to analyze the data to find subgroups. How can we identify people that are more likely to decline over time? Maybe they have this characteristic or that, and they're using artificial intelligence to really look into the data and identify things we might not be able to see on the surface. Those are kind of the ways that they stand out to me, but it's kind of entering like every aspect of research probably. So,
Thank you. Stephanie, did your father's illness motivate his friends to become more involved in the study? He certainly had a major influence on your participation, but what about his friends?
Oh, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Yes, absolutely. My father had a huge village. He had a good-sized family, but he had a lot of friends, and a lot of friends stepped up to the plate just to help him go to different places. He liked to be involved. He was very social. So, yep, they made sure he got to the bathroom or he got a plate. So it was family and friends that actually, you know, stepped up to help us with my family's journey. But the day-to-day, you know, going to bed, the bathroom and all of that stuff, that was pretty much up to my mother, myself, and my husband. So it's kind of small when we were in the house, but when we got out, definitely people stepped up to help. Did it what? Oh, absolutely. Because I think, I don't really.
You better repeat that, not everyone heard.
Someone asked, did it prompt them to go through the program and get more information about Alzheimer's? And it did. It was a shock not only to our family, but friends. We didn't really know much about it. We heard about Alzheimer's, but didn't know about it. So I think as my father kind of progressed along the disease, friends and family started trying to gain more information. So absolutely.
Okay, so everyone has a packet in front of you of the slides, and also at the end, the keys to protect your brain. And that's for you to keep if you wish. Can you copy and send to friends and relatives? Yes, there is a licensing fee, so if afterwards you see me here at the podium, and we'll discuss the costs. No, you're welcome to share it. Welcome to share it. Dr. Hahn, what about insurance coverage in this early detection? Is that something that is covered by insurance?
Very good question. For now, we've been getting more insurance coverage. In general, spinal fluid has been used the most long time, so most of the insurances will cover. Amyloid PET, like we said, since I think it's the January 2024, but the CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, started to cover if this were to be used. So since then, most of the major insurances have been covering them. With the caveat, some of the private insurances will say, oh, is it going to be impacting the treatment? Is this person a candidate for anti-amyloid therapy? Now, for the blood tests, there's only one that's been approved by the FDA so far for the use of the diagnosing, and the rest are still underway. And I think it still is a hit or miss from us. But sometimes if we get lucky, they may cover. If they don't, and then we'll try to find alternative ways to kind of find a test that will cover. And that has, unfortunately made us to kind of diagnose more of these with amyloid PET, is because most of our patients are usually over 65 and they are under Medicare.
One of you is, at least one of you is very knowledgeable about the brain and risk for Alzheimer's disease, and talks about something called the glymphatic system in the brain. The brain is tissue, but it's surrounded by fluid. There's cerebrospinal fluid. That's what we obtain when we do a spinal tap. But there are also other fluid pathways in the brain that help keep the circulation going and drain the brain of old substances and so forth. And the glymphatic system is one that has been under great investigation of how it might influence brain function. We are doing a small study, maybe some of you have been asked to do it, of trying to understand better the system of brain drainage in the glymphatic system. And the idea is, if some of you have been asked to do this, is to collect cells from your scalp because they have entry into the brain and may give a window into that brain fluid system. So we've just started that study. I don't know how many people have been asked to give their scalp cells. Turns out it becomes important to use the right shampoo for a week before the testing. I don't understand it all, but anyway, that's going on. Justin, would you address the question of how do we go about, if we're interested in brain donation, how do we do that?
Yeah, so at every visit for participants, we ask about your interest and willingness to donate your brain. For those who have told us that they're not interested, we stop asking. So if you've changed your mind, please let us know, and we'll be happy to address that. For those who have told us that they're uncertain, at every subsequent visit, we continue to ask until you tell us either yes or no. But we have a formal process. Our MAP staff, especially Kelly Dwyer, who's one of our research coordinators, is an expert in all the logistics. There's a number of logistics involved. We always give you a little slip of information of who to call. The key is obviously that when you pass away, you're not going to be the one to implement those logistics, and so your family needs to be aware and have the number to call. But basically, you call a number, and then things happen on our end to ensure that your brain is collected as expediently as possible. But if you're interested, just letting us know, and we have a consent form that you sign, and then we continue to follow up with you every 6 months or so just to ensure that you're still interested and making sure that you have that contact information.
If you have a question today about brain donation, you don't necessarily have to wait until your next assessment. In the back corner of the room, Nicole Elmore is standing up and waving her arm. And if you have a question about it, please see her after the panel discussion here today. Someone asked about the FDA-approved blood tests that you can get. I think one is by Fuji Rebio and the other is by Roche, but there's going to be a lot coming down the road. I think Justin mentioned C2N. It's a company here in St. Louis started by some of our colleagues, and I think the FDA is going to approve that very, very soon as well. Does WashU work with St. Louis University if someone donates their brain to either university? Sadly, no. We used to have a relationship with St. Louis University. They sort of tailed off in their brain donation program for a while, and now we don't have a relationship with them. Nicole, am I correct on that or incorrect? Incorrect? Correct, okay. So sadly, no. Ji Young, you're getting infusions for, I don't know what, 18 months with these new drugs? What happens when the infusions stop?
Yeah, that's another very good question. Depending on which one, it varies, because the lecanemab actually was approved for something called the maintenance dosing. And the thought is they can still take out the amyloid proteins from the spinal fluid. So what we would do is both for patients with donanemab or lecanemab, we will repeat a amyloid scan about when they're in the 18th month mark, and we'll see how much is actually cleared. And if you're on lecanemab, then we may choose to go on for the maintenance dosing, which would be every 4 weeks, or they now have an injectable that you can inject at home weekly for the maintenance. Or for donanemab, it's actually clear for if, let's say, oh, you've cleared all your amyloids, then you stop the medicine. So, from both sides, we will probably repeat the amyloid PET scan to see the clearance. and then probably take it from there, and we may choose to continue or not, depending on which medicine that you were on.
Okay, another question, and I'm sorry I don't have a good response for this one. Someone agreed to donate their body to St. Louis University. Now they're a Memory and Aging Project participant, and they'd like to donate their brain to the Memory and Aging Project. Is that possible? And Nicole says, yes, it is. It is possible to do that. And I know that's the way we have it with the body donor program at Washington University, that you can donate your entire body to Washington University, but if you're a Memory and Aging Project participant, they'll let us have the brain as well. So I think it's the same with St. Louis University. Okay, Dr. Peterson, how far time-wise are we from your groundbreaking research to using this in the clinic, to applying it to everyday people?
Well, like I said in the talk, we're definitely not there yet. Right now, our models are only able to predict like group level estimates. So it kind of makes sense for applying to a trial. If you want to enroll enough people in a trial that you can estimate a certain number might decline over 18 months or something. How far until we can use this? I mean, I don't know. There's a couple aspects to that. One is maybe we can create better modeling techniques, and that's kind of what I'm working on. But also, can we integrate other biomarkers? So something I'm interested in is, as a practical aspect, can we include blood tests and MRI that maybe are easy to get? And I think once we include more biomarkers that are already available, they'll get better. But also, new biomarkers are coming out. No one's mentioned it, I don't think, today, but there's a new biomarker called EMTBR243 that's kind of brand new within the last year or so. And once I get my hands on that, I think that will improve our models. So I don't really have a good guess for when it might be. I don't want to guess, but I mean, I'm hopeful that it will be soon.
Couple of interesting questions here. Can anybody, any physician, order an Alzheimer blood test? Yes. But it's complicated. First, not all blood tests are necessarily that accurate. Some of them are better than others. So at first, there is no test in Alzheimer's disease or in medicine in general that is absolutely 100% accurate or not. All tests have some problems. But some blood tests are very good and some are really not good. So that's one thing. What blood tests are you getting? Second, if you don't have memory problems and you get a blood test, what are you going to do with the result? If it's positive, you can't get treatment. Now maybe I've talked about prevention. Maybe that's going to happen. That's what we want to happen. But right now, there's nothing you can do about that. And three, if you have dementia, is the doctor who is getting the blood test and say it's positive able to give you the treatment? And the question has already come up. Right now, most treatment is being done in the specialty clinics, such as the Memory Diagnostic Center. And unfortunately, and this was a comment from one of you, it's really hard to get into the Memory Diagnostic Center. The wait time for a new patient appointment is over a year. Over a year. Because the demand is high, general physicians don't know how to treat Alzheimer's. They don't want to deal with the drugs. And it's a problem. I don't have a good answer for it. Legal question. Can you drive legally if you have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease? Well, yes. There are some people with Alzheimer's disease who are safe drivers. I think Dr. Hahn Dr. Long, in their clinic patients, if someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's and driving, are they still safe to drive? A way to evaluate that is to take a driving evaluation. And I think they would recommend that someone have such an evaluation. But people in the earliest, and I think everyone alluded to this, in the earliest stages of the disease really are quite functional. Handling finances, handling their medications, driving. So it's possible to drive. But eventually, everyone with Alzheimer's is going to deteriorate. A lot on brain donation. Yeah, I don't know. Justin, you started something with your plea to donate your brain. So the question is, if I don't die in a hospital, can my brain still be donated? I would say the majority of our brain donations come from people who die at home or in a nursing home or something like that. So the answer is yes, no question about it. We are very prepared to do that, so no problem. I knew this was going to come up. I'm going to give it to Justin. Okay, what about marijuana?
I would say there's no evidence that marijuana has any sort of effect on disease progression in Alzheimer's disease. So when patients ask me about this, I do not recommend marijuana. I don't know what else to say beyond that.
Couple of questions about how to get into the study. I said, unfortunately, right now, we're not accepting new participants, but we are certainly taking names and contact information from anyone who is interested, and we'll be happy to do that here today. And when our funding is clarified and hopefully given to us, we'll call you, we'll bring you in. But right now, we cannot take, we just don't have the funding to be able to take new patients. Okay, I've got 3 minutes here. By the way, I am so impressed with all of you and your really excellent questions. Excellent questions. I think I'll actually, there are so many here, I don't think we can do them all. Is there a link between tinnitus and Alzheimer's dementia? I really, really hope not, because I have tinnitus. There is no known link between the two. No known link. Family history, increased risk. Absolutely. The two greatest risks for Alzheimer's, number one is what? Age, getting older. Number two, family history. Now, the family history gets confusing sometimes. It's genetic, but what you might inherit from your parents who maybe had Alzheimer's is being more susceptible to Alzheimer's disease, not causing it. I try to say it this way. You can look at me. Oh, you can't. I was going to say, you could see I'm a redhead. When I was younger, I was a redhead, which means I'm very fair-skinned, very pale. This is genetic. My parents are Northern European heritage. I have very low pigment. As a kid, I'd go out and play, and I'd get sunburned. Is my genetic inheritance causing me to get sunburned? I had to go out in the sun, right? I'm susceptible to it, but something else has to trigger it. Am I making any sense? So you can inherit a susceptibility from your parents for Alzheimer's, but it's not the cause. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, two last things. Thank you all for being here today. Two last things. Number one, once again, let's thank our great speakers. And number two, thank yourselves. You are terrific. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of the weekend. We will see you next year.